Excited today. Usman was one of my past organic chemistry students. And so we're going to get to pick his brain on his college experience, what it was like being a STEM major, and then applying to graduate schools as well. So, Usman, we're going to go ahead and get started. Tell us a little bit about your educational background. What was your major?
Sounds good. Thank you for having me, Omar. So in terms of my major, I decided to just keep it basic as a traditional pre-med. I was a biology major with a minor in public health. And so the courses were pretty much revolved around biology, a lot of science-based courses. And the more difficult side of things was the chemistry stuff for me. But I found help and it worked out, thankfully. But aside from that, I just the public health minor courses were pretty standard, pretty easy. And during my undergrad time, this was during COVID, so I got sent home, had online for about a little over a year and a half to 2 years. So it was different compared to what the students now. It's all in person, back to the swing of things. But yeah, so that was pretty much my educational background throughout undergrad. And
So you said so did you graduate recently, if memory serves me correctly?
yes, I graduated in 2023 spring from the Ohio State University. Enjoyed my time there, it was nice. And now I'm working during a gap year at the University of Michigan. So it's funny, I just went to Ohio State and now I'm at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, I saw you. You posted something about the Ohio State Michigan game, and I didn't know that you were a Michigan fan. And I sent you a text. I said, "Had I known, I would have never tutored you." So,
Yeah, I was
uh,
good for that.
yeah. So let me ask you another question here. So, what were some of the hardest courses you took as an undergrad?
Yeah, in terms of the hardest courses, definitely the Gen Chem and the organic chemistry specifically. Those are the ones I struggled with the most. And this was, I think, Gen Chem, especially because you're taking that your first semester into undergrad. It's a big transition compared to the difficulty in high school. So it was a lot, especially at a big institution. And then organic chemistry was when I was online. So I took that over the summer at Toledo and waited to do the labs. So I did the labs and those were in person. And I was hearing a lot of stuff from friends that this is a really hard lab. You got to stay on top of it. And I already knew I wasn't good at Orgo. So I knew I needed help. And this is exactly why I came to you. And it paid off, thankfully.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that organic chemistry specifically. What was your experience with it in terms of like figuring out how challenging it was, and then also like how to hack it? Like, was there some point that it clicked? What was that like progression like?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I need that structure, and in a class like that, it's like a lot of stuff you have to do individually outside of the classroom to really understand everything. And so I was lost. I didn't really know where to start, how to approach it. So I think for me, I needed that structure, and me and you coordinated a good schedule, and I started to practice every day, practice the right stuff, and then it helped out a lot because I think other than that, I would have just been lost trying to do stuff all over the place. And yeah,
Yeah. So when you studied for OChem, like what was it that helped it click for you? I know that you started to do well. You started to see the results that you wanted to see. You were putting in the work, and then finally, you felt really confident with it.
mhm.
What was that moment? What happened? Walk us through that.
Yeah, I think it was just the consistency of doing it every single day, the repetition, the practice, seeing a variety of problems, how this question could be asked this way, and just really trying to tackle it from all angles and utilizing the practice problems, practice questions. Because yeah, I needed to routinely do this every day, practice the concepts and questions every day. And it just took time. And I think for me too, getting over the intimidation factor of organic chemistry was a thing. So after I got over that and started doing stuff every day, it started to click.
Yeah, I always tell students, I know sounds a lot, it's a sticker shock when I say this, but when I was studying for it, it was 2 or 3 hours a day for me. I literally put in that time, and the consistency eventually showed up. It wasn't where I wanted to be at the beginning of the semester, but then eventually shot up where the midterm I did one of the best in the class. And so the consistency is huge. People don't recognize that. And I always say, from jujitsu, they say slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It's super important to recognize that that's how it's going to be. You came to me, I think, halfway through the semester, or maybe at the very beginning. I don't remember. Let
This,
me remind me.
yeah, this it was probably a week or two into the semester of
Oh,
it
wow.
because
Okay.
in the concepts and I was lost. So
Yeah,
yeah, I needed to right away.
that's awesome. And by the end of it, you did really, really well. And so you started from the beginning. I think one of the challenges that I faced from this end of things is students wait to find me halfway through when a lot of the fundamentals are already behind them. And if they struggled with that, you're building on top of everything. I think I talked about this in my course, essentially, that there was, a point where students were just so far behind that it wasn't even possible for them to like both work backwards and learn the new material. And so they wait to get help. I think what it is maybe they're a little bit at first over optimistic in that they can do it, and then maybe they didn't really get put against the wall essentially until. So what was different about you? Like, what was it? Was there less stigma with you to have a tutor or to have like somebody helping you? Is that like a normal thing?
Yeah, personally speaking from experience, I think that not seeking help and having this ego where, oh, you'll figure it out is one of the biggest mistakes someone can make throughout undergrad because you got to be willing to ask questions and seek help when it's needed. And especially in since day one for a class like organic chemistry, if you know you're lost, you should find help because like you said, halfway through the semester, a lot of the previous concepts they build on top of each other, and you don't want to wait too late to where it gets to that point where you're so far behind still. So just since a young age too, my dad was always like, "Don't be afraid to ask questions," and I try not to be, especially throughout undergrad, because if you don't know something, you definitely should seek help. So for me personally, I don't understand the stigma really around the negative stigma around getting tutors because it's beneficial if you ask me.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit. I always say that you're the CEO of your life. You want to outsource it, so you have an accountant as a CEO. You have, a data analyst. You have somebody in marketing, somebody in PR, and you're kind of coordinating all of that. You're doing the work. It's not like you're trying to shirk the work or dismiss it. But what you're doing is having people in your life supporting you to be able to do that. And honestly, it makes things so much easier. And in a way you learn a lot more deeply. One of the things I remember working with you on is we talked about this concept, this idea of putting together almost like internal checklists of how to approach certain problems. You always do this first, always do that first, always do that first. Atul Gawande, in his book, The Checklist Manifesto, he's a neurosurgeon and he writes, he's one of the most prolific writers in medicine. He talks about developing a checklist to make sure that they don't mess up in surgeries. So he has to go through this checklist. His nurse has to go through the checklist. A third person has to go, and they all have to sign off on it. And it ensures that there's accuracy. And so I remember doing that with you. And then there's also, the famous, everybody knows pilots. Pilots will go through a checklist as well. When the risks are high, it becomes super important. So there's a level, first is the concept understanding, then it's the repetition of the problems, but then you get to a level where you know stuff, but now you're just ensuring that you're not making careless mistakes. And then there's a checklist aspect of things. Tell us a little bit about that and your experience with that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, because I remember when I came to in the beginning doing these problems. Again, I was lost. I didn't know how to approach them, know where to really start. And I think a lot of people are in that position too, especially taking orgo. You don't really know how to approach these problems. And then I remember I was only 5 steps to follow for approaching these types of questions that we were
Yeah.
working. And every single time we'd go through that checklist, solve the problems, and it was working out every single time. We would just go through the step one, step two, and then I started seeing better results once I was consistently approaching problems that way. Because the concept was for like IR spec and NMR spec and really tough concepts. Everyone in the class would struggle with those types of questions, but we broke it down and it helped out a lot.
Yeah, it's just super important. And then that's what, having a tutor can help you with, and having somebody work with you can help you with. They understand the material from like a bird's eye view perspective, and now they can start to see patterns and unlock that for you. And so that way you just show up, follow the steps, keep repeating that in terms of practice, and eventually you get to the right answers. And so I saw you really run with that more so than a lot of students might, because you followed the system. I think students are like, no, no, I'm going to take a shortcut, or yeah, I get what you're trying to do here, but I'm not like somebody who's systematic like that. And I think again, having a system with every type of problem or every idea or concept, these are the 5 things that you look for
Mm.
factors that affect stability, for instance. Go down that checklist every time when you're lost or confused or whatever. So let's step back a little bit and talk about undergrad. What mistakes did you make in terms of undergrad, and what lessons did you wish you learned sooner?
In terms of the mistakes I made in undergrad, I would say the biggest thing, especially freshman year, was just the time management aspect of things. I was living on my own. I didn't have my parents to, wake me up, tell me to do this and all that stuff. So the time management part of things was a lot because I mean, as a pre-med, you're taking some intense courses. And I grew up playing soccer, and I think that kept me really structured, like go to practice, go to school. And I lost that in undergrad. Freshman year, I was just a regular student attending classes. So sometimes it may have seemed like I had more free time out of the classroom, and I would end up wasting it rather than maximizing it. So time management for sure, but that got better as the years went on. Other than time management, I think seeking help when I needed to, especially was another one. Sometimes I'd be afraid to ask questions to the professor because it's in such a big lecture hall. But in the first semester, I wasn't emailing or asking as many questions, and then once I started to do that, seeking help, I saw improvement for sure. So those two things really, I think, were the biggest things for me.
Yeah, and then what did you wish you knew before, like that you didn't know, or maybe you were surprised by in undergrad?
Yeah, I, maybe something I wish I did know during undergrad was again, I think just the seeking help aspect of things, that like the professors and
Mhm.
tutors, people like that are there to help you and you shouldn't be afraid to ask. And maybe sometimes too for me, I was like, oh, I shouldn't go to this club's event. Like I'm that little social anxiety factor. You're in a big campus. It's a new thing. So I didn't really do that stuff much first semester, but again, as undergrad went on, I started to attend more events, meet new people, network, and it helped out a lot. I got more comfortable at the university, made some good friends. So really branching out of your
Yeah.
comfort zone too is helpful.
Yeah, I remember that I made that same mistake. I think I was so focused on doing well academically. I told myself I didn't really have time to socialize and what have you. That was the first thing to go always. Then I realized, and even, now I'm beyond undergrad, how important networking is. There are groups at your university, very likely, that already have a lot of the shortcuts to stuff. They know how things work. And if you tap into that, like, collective knowledge, it shortens the learning curve on so many different things. I was talking to a student who was telling me he was in like some sort of finance fraternity, and literally they passed down so much insight on how the university ended up working and the ins and outs of things. And so, really, kind of leveraging a lot of those groups. And not all groups or organizations are created equal. Some people know the ins and outs and everything, and some people don't. And by you being in one or the other, it really makes a difference. I tell students this all the time. I think that, they say that your net worth is, the sum total or the average of the people around you. In reality, your grades are very much like that too. Your college experience is very
Right.
much like that too. So, starting out and finding the right people. Let me ask you this to add on to that. Would you say the people around you, were that for you, that they were all very like dedicated and hardworking? Did you find that you made friends with people like that a little bit more easily than other people who didn't maybe want to go to med school and didn't take undergrad as seriously?
Yeah, especially in high school, I was yeah, I was hung out with majority of my friends were not on track to become a doctor and stuff, so it was a big transition for me. And in undergrad, I connected with a nice group of guys who were on the same page as me that were focused in terms of trying to get the best grades and eventually get into medical school, but also to have some fun on the weekends and enjoy ourselves and not overdo anything. And I think finding that balance is really hard, but once you do it, it becomes a really enjoyable experience throughout your time.
Yeah, how long did that take for you to find that balance?
For me, I think it took a whole semester. It took a whole semester. And for some people, of course, it varies from person to person. Some people can immediately hop into it. Maybe a week, they'll get in the swing of things. Some people it takes longer. But for me, I think it was a semester.
You mentioned earlier time management. You wish you, would have not made that mistake or figured that out sooner, or understood that a little bit better. Tell us what system you had in place essentially to manage your time.
Yeah, and so at first, the stuff I wasn't really doing appropriately was just having that balance, like doing coursework, staying on top of all my coursework, but also finding time to enjoy myself, whether it was go out, hang out with friends, play soccer, get some dinner, or even go to the gym and stuff like that. So I think really for me, it was meeting a good group of people, which helped me figure that out, fix it, and essentially holding each other accountable. All right, we'll go to the library, we'll get this taken care of, and then we'll go work out, and we'll finish all our work by Friday so we can go play soccer, stuff like that. I think really
Yeah.
holding each other accountable helped me out a lot. Having that positive peer pressure was big.
What about in terms of like tools, like Google Calendar or like task list, that kind of thing?
I know a lot of people use Google Calendar, but I didn't really start to until the end of my undergrad because once I started to get the hang of how things worked, it was I didn't really forget about when to do certain things, when to because of course there's that big pressure as a pre med, like you need to finish these assignments by this day, get this grade. So I didn't really utilize anything like that. I think the biggest thing for me was just the people I surrounded myself with, holding each other accountable.
Did you have that one person in your circle who always knew the dates and who was like super organized that helped you?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. There,
Yeah,
I feel like there's always that one guy, yeah, and there's always that one guy who needs that support behind him.
yeah, 100%. I was that one guy when I was back in undergrad. I knew everything. So then how did you get all the syllabi and like all of that like straight and not confusing deadlines and all that stuff? Was it still the group? Like were you all taking the same classes? Was that how it was or
Yeah, so yeah, of course, first semester you see the syllabus, it's really long. You're concerned, you don't know how to approach it. But yeah, after I met a good group of friends, we essentially would try and get the same classes. You're on the same track too. A few of mine were same exact major as well. So yeah, we would try to take the same classes. But I think it's important too, because of course you're not going to always have that same class with that one friend. So you got to really try and meet people in your classroom and make friends and network within the class. Because I think for me, in every single class I had, I always made a few friends, a few new friends, and we would hold each other accountable, do some homework together, study together. So that helps out a lot. And the biggest thing too, of course, is seeking help. You got to email the professor, email your TAs, find some support outside of that. If it's a tutor, and then ultimately, there's no reason why you shouldn't be successful.
yeah, I remember, when I had a group of people in a certain class with me, and we had like a question bank of concepts and ideas and problems that we had to solve. And so each of us would kind of break down like which ones we wanted to like take over, or take care of, or learn about. And we would go to office hours together, and all of us would ask different questions. And then
Right.
after the debrief, right? So we
Hmm.
all got pretty much the same answer from the professor on a lot of the different problems. And so it was super helpful to do like things like that because, again, you kind of have to leverage your resources. The ultimate resource is being resourceful, and a lot of people around you. How did you deal with competition? Because like it's subtly competitive, but also cooperative. How do you navigate that line between, you have friends that you're also competing with, people you're competing with in classes, but you also help each other. You're going to apply to the same schools probably. So
Yeah,
how do you deal with that? That must have been tough.
of course, especially trying to go to grad school, like medical school or dental school or something like that. It can be a very toxic environment, a very competitive environment. And of course, there are those people in your classroom hoping that the person next to them doesn't get that A, doesn't do well in this course. So I
Yeah.
think for me too, you gotta just worry about worry about yourself. Try and do the best you can, get the scores you can, and for me, I would, I guess, be careful who I shared certain stuff with in the classroom, whether it was like exact details about how I'm doing in the course and stuff like that. But I think I'm really fortunate too to have met a nice group of guys who were always happy for each other when we did well. We wanted to see each other do well. So that helped out a lot as well because it can be a very competitive and toxic environment. For me and my friends too, I think it was positive competition. We would try and push each other to get the higher score, so it helped out in that way.
Yeah, and I think too, like a lot more people would be more insecure if there's a huge difference in your grades and work ethic. Like
Right.
if you're getting an A and they're getting a C and you're hanging out, like yeah, it's gonna might be a problem. So kind of, I think the people who maybe felt insecure or weren't on your level in terms of competition or just weren't, putting in the work. Yeah, it could be very easy to do to kind of maybe try to undermine you or sabotage or whatever. And so when you have a group of people who are kind of on the same wavelength, it makes you much more successful. Tell me a little bit about habits, how habits that really were instrumental to your success in undergrad.
Yeah, in terms of habits, I think it's really important to take care of your mental outside of the classroom. So I would try and work out at least 5 days out of the week because that helped me out. And it's a habit I recommend. It helped me out outside of the classroom, staying focused, and you feel better about yourself. You see progress in the gym. Another habit too is I think it was important to make find time to still do things you love. Like I grew up playing soccer throughout my life, so I wanted to at least do some of that throughout undergrad. So I would try to on the weekends. But having a good routine that you stick to weekly is important for success. So I would try and wake up, go like I couldn't study really in my apartment, so I needed to go to the library. So I would try and routinely, habitually go to the library, do my work over there, and just work out, make time for myself, and then everything fell into place when I kept stayed to that routine and stayed to my structure.
I always say this to students, mental health is super important, absolutely. But I also think that um, it can be distracting in a way because a lot of students will be like, okay, in order to do well, I need to do all these 15 mental health habits that will lead me to succeed. When in reality, it's like, yeah, you got to focus on your academics, give your time and energy to that, and then have the mental health habits there as well. But like focusing obsessively on like all of the right mental health, I got to meditate, exactly 35 minutes a day, that kind of thing. It can really be counterproductive because,
Mhm.
again, it's like, what will get you the score is knowing the stuff. There are people who meditate and get the grade. There are people who don't meditate and get the grade. That
Right.
stuff is for you and to go through the process with some sanity, but it is not the thing that will get you the score. It can help by for sure. Exercise can help you think better, sharper, clearer. So can meditation, right? But it's like an added edge that you need to be the most competitive that you can be. But it alone, I don't care how much you meditate, if you don't study, you're not you're not going to get the grade on the exam. It's just not going to happen. So people talk about mental health a lot, and
For
sometimes
sure.
it causes students to shift focus on that more than anything else. And there's got to be a balance. You got to actually, know the stuff, put in the reps, put in the work, but then also make sure you don't go to the other extreme and burn yourself out. So that's important too.
Yeah.
Um, Talk to us a little bit about networking. So we already talked a little bit about that in terms of your social circle, in terms of your friends group, and what you guys were on the same wavelength. But what about networking and how important that is in undergrad? I bring this up because I didn't buy into the networking myth, or not myth. It was a myth to me. I was like, no, if you just work hard, you get the stats. Everybody's going to want to accept you. But there is really a strong element of networking in who you know, the research advisor that you have, so on and
Hmm.
so forth.
Definitely. Yeah. I think no matter what field you are trying to succeed in, networking is very important in terms of reaching your goals because it's about who you know, but also who knows you. So I think building relationships opens doors to a lot of opportunity, whether it's in your career, personal growth, or just unexpected collaborations. You never know who might help you out, who might open that door for you. And since a young age, I've always been social. I've always been, I guess, good with people. I knew how to talk. I knew how to socialize. So that wasn't too hard of a thing for me. I think you just have to try and attend as many events you can go to, club events, talk to the right people in class. Just don't be afraid to introduce yourself, reach out to people because connections and networking can be very helpful down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about like a letter of recommendation, getting one from a professor. What did that process look like?
Yeah, so again, for me, this was like during COVID, so it was hard to really get that personal connection with your professor. But you have to be willing to email them outside of class, maybe stay a little bit after class to just get that one-on-one face-to-face interaction because you're in this big classroom trying to get the professor to know who you are. Sometimes it could be the end of the semester and the professor still won't even know your face. So just staying after a little bit, emailing them says a lot. They'll definitely remember you. I think attending office hours as well is very important because that gives the professor time to see that you care, that you're doing the work outside of class. So you can't just email the professor, hey, I'm applying to med school. I need a letter of rec. You got to actually establish a personal connection. And just by doing things like that, emailing them, staying after class, participating, attending office hours, that'll help you out a lot. But you don't want to make it seem like that's your end goal is to just use this teacher to get a letter of rec out of them. So you got to really try and establish a personal connection. I remember my biochem professor liked soccer, so we connected a lot on that, and he wrote me a good letter of rec.
Yeah, I always say that they filter their like letter of recommendation through themselves. So if they're passionate about something and they see that in you, then they'll tend to write a much stronger letter of recommendation. They're like, oh, this guy's just like me, or this person is just like me, right? So when they feel that way, they really go above and beyond in writing one. The other thing that I would say about letter of recommendations is just how intentional the process is. It's not going to fall in your lap. Students somehow, I don't know why, because at the end of the fourth year, students come to me like, hey, I need a letter of rec and I don't have anything. I'm like, did you develop any relationship? They're like, no, I didn't. Or I didn't talk to them after a while. You really have to be very intentional with this. You got to reach out. And then you also have to kind of, when you say personal, you almost have to let them into your world a little bit. So that
Exactly.
way you can get some advice from them on certain things that everybody loves to give advice. It makes them feel that they're important. It makes them feel like they're adding value to your life. And so
Right.
Give them that gift of like letting them in. I mean, you don't have to, unmask all your baggage and all the drama of your dating life or personal life or whatever it is. But
Right.
the idea here is to really like get advice on, hey, I'm thinking of this research, I'm thinking of this opportunity, this internship. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Even if you don't really plan on using that, but doing so really puts them in a place where they recognize that you actually care about who they are, and you actually are into building a personal relationship. And even to this day, I still have connections with old professors. I update them on what I'm doing. I follow them on LinkedIn to make sure that they see what it is I'm up to.
Right.
Those little things are super important. People take for granted because even now, after I've graduated for many years, I still rely on them for letters of rec when I need 4 or 5 for a certain position. So it's super important to do that, and I think it's some skill that you can learn. One more thing, talk to us actually too. We'll talk a little bit about the MCAT, and then also about research. Do you mind sharing what you're researching, or what essentially your lab's about, and then also how you were able to get a
Yeah.
position?
Of course, yeah. I can give a bigger picture of everything in terms of the research. So I did a little bit in undergrad at Ohio State. It was tough to get the position initially because of COVID, but in my senior year of undergrad at Ohio State, just from purely knowing someone from back home, being family friends with them, that connection. This nice girl, she was a clinical research coordinator of the orthopedic department at Ohio State. So I just texted her, reached out, and she got me on board throughout the last year of uh, my undergrad. And we did a couple projects together, which was nice. And then after undergrad, I decided to take a gap year and explore more research opportunity because I feel like that enhances your resume and experience well down the road in terms of this pre-med track. So my uncle is a neuroradiologist in Michigan, specifically at Beaumont Hospital, and I was talking to him. I always share my goals and update him on what I'm doing. He's a good mentor for me. So he told me he knew some people at Michigan Medicine, and just again going back to the networking thing, just having him as a connection, he helped me get a position at Michigan Medicine. Again, yeah, it's funny, Ohio State to Michigan, but yeah, so it's been good. I'm doing that throughout my gap year. It's paid, which is nice, and it's in the Department of Radiology, which is nice because it's not like always like X-rays and stuff. Of course, like typical radiology, you're doing a diverse set of projects that really expands into multiple specialties. Whether one is about pulmonology, the next one's about orthopedics. So it's nice. I'm enjoying myself. I've met some new people, some nice connections, and it's been good.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that's the power again of networking. Not everybody's fortunate to have that or to have somebody in their circle like that. And to which I respond, everybody's connected by, 2 or 3 degrees of separation,
Right.
meaning maybe you don't have somebody like that in your network. That's why it's even more important for you to leverage a relationship with a professor. There are other things you can do, and I talk about this as well in other places that you can do to find, some research, and then also how to vet research, because a lot of people go and take whoever accepts them, but you
Yeah.
really want to get a publication, and to do that, you need to find somebody who's able to give that to you, and then
Mhm.
also kind of how to set the expectations so it's clear that that's possible. Did you talk about that with your undergrad research when you partnered with that individual? Did you talk about expectations for
Yeah,
publications?
of course. I think I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that is very important, making sure they're on the same page as you in terms of your goals. So yeah, I did of course tell her I'm motivated to do everything that's needed on my end, but my end goal is to eventually try and get as many publications as I can. I worded it differently, of course, but I think being honest with them in terms of what you want and what your goals are.
How would you word it? I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah,
Like, Give us an example so students listening can be like, oh, this is a great way to word it. This is one option. I like to give students like five, six, seven techniques, tools,
Yeah.
strategies, and they can pick what they feel works best for them. But how did you word it? Like, what would you say to say? Because you definitely want to make the expectations clear. A lot of
Yeah.
students think it will happen magically, and I know I'm not going to mention, but I know people personally who went through, did so much work, and were kind of used as a workhorse and never got any publications. And they did fantastic work, like really hardworking individuals.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's important too. So in terms of how I went about it, I just brought up an example of my neighbor who is an orthopedic resident now, and I just brought up to my clinical research coordinator that I'm interested in doing research because my neighbor told me he took a gap year in medical school to specifically get publications to enhance his resume to get
Mhm.
a competitive residency position. So I told her I want to be just like that and to enhance my resume as much as I can by trying to get as many publications as I want. Not as I want, but as possible. So I think just giving that example was good because it showed her that I want a competitive residency. I want to try and do whatever work is needed to get these publications. So that's how I went about it. And for me too, that's it's a family friend, so it was a bit
Yeah.
different from situation. So
Yeah,
yeah,
but I think the principle is valid there. It's still the same and universal. I think I also like what you said. I'm willing to do everything on my end
yeah,
in terms of work to be able to achieve that if possible. And I think from there, they knew what you're about and what you're looking for. Um,
exactly.
there's always going to be a risk, I think, that people take advantage of like your work or whatever, which is why you have to look at like how prolific the lab is, how big the lab is,
Right.
if you know past students, if you know past students that can speak to a certain professor, that's great. It's rare that you know anybody, but maybe you look at their website, see who else, if the students are posted, whatever. I have some other secret techniques. It's a secret sauce that I'll be sharing in other places of how to really figure that out and how to go
Yeah,
about doing that. And it's super, super important to be able to do so because it sets you apart for the application process. Publications are really, really impressive, especially when they're in a great number. You got two or three on your belt. Getting one is great. It's almost like the something you have to do. Not
yeah,
having any is like almost going to hurt you unless you're strong in other cases. So
yeah,
that's something to think about. That you have to really kind of have something on your list, unless again you have other factors like that you're really good. I was in athletics. I spent my entire time there, so it speaks to your strengths as an individual in other ways, not necessarily through research, and that's important. Lastly, let's touch a little bit on the MCAT.
yeah.
What was the MCAT like? What mistakes did you make? And then what was the most challenging aspect of it?
Yeah. In terms of the MCAT, it was the first thing I can think of right now is just the intimidation factor of it.
Mhm.
So everyone talks about it. It's a very long exam. That's essentially what is preventing you from getting into medical school. That's one of the biggest hurdles you have to overcome to get in. So once you just get over that intimidation factor of it, it helps. So that's one. That was a big mistake I had. I was just always intimidated by it, by when I was doing questions, and I would get down on myself because during studying, I had so many bad days where I would just get a lot of questions wrong, and then I would just be too hard on myself, like, oh, I can't do this. I don't want to be a doctor anymore. But having approaching it with a good mindset and keeping yourself structured is really helpful. And again, another mistake I think too is, which I can speak from experience, I know many people will agree, is wasting too much time on content review. You want to,
Mhm.
yeah, you want to really just, if someone asked me for advice right now, I would say do your content review through practice questions and just since day one, because then you'll really see what you need to brush up on what content gaps you have, and at the same time you'll be familiarizing yourself at an early step in your studying schedule with what questions are going to be like. So I wasted too much time on content review, but yeah, that's a big mistake, and I know many will agree.
I
So
think everybody does. I think everybody thinks that I really don't know it and I really need to review it. And so there's no way I could do these problems. And I talk a little bit again elsewhere, a little bit more how to address that. Like, how can you dive straight into the problems and not necessarily just obsess over the content review to make sure that you know everything? There is a way to do it, but you have to kind of shift your frame about it and your mentality. But yeah, you mentioned like less content review, more problems.
yeah,
And so what did that process look like? Did it take you a couple months? What
yeah.
did that look like for you?
So before I even started, I was like, okay, I'm one who needs to study more than the person next to me, which I've realized and throughout my classes, which is completely normal. So I was like, I'm going to give myself 5 months. I'll do 2 to 3 months content review, and then the remaining time I'll just do practice questions, practice tests. I ended up wasting an extra month in terms of content review, which was very detrimental to my score, I think. And so I started doing practice questions too late. But once I started to, I would see more improvement every day. Yeah, I think ultimately just doing practice questions is the best thing you can do. And for me too, I had a really close friend of mine who was taking it at the same time, same date actually. So we would keep each other accountable to like, hey, make sure you do a practice test this weekend and then go over it the next day. So finding someone maybe to, because I needed that structure. And a lot of these courses out there like Blueprint, Princeton, from people that have told me I don't think they're worth it. I think it's a money grab for those courses specifically because it's hard to get that one-on-one structure from them. So you got to establish that individually or whether it's through someone else that you can do that through one-on-one. And you got to be disciplined with it. You can't slack off. It's a tough exam. So you got to be willing to put the work in and not be lazy. I had to sacrifice some weekends, not some, many weekends during this grind, but it pays off in the end. So
Did you study with courses, like with your classes, or did you study like on its own dedicated time?
yeah, so I was it was the tough course I was taking during the studying of my MCAT was biochem. Other than that, it was a really light schedule. But I mean, biochem essentially, I guess studying for the MCAT in a way, just because that's a solid portion of it. But and then I studied for 2 months in the summer, so then that was just purely strictly MCAT. So yeah, I started in the second semester of my junior year and took it in June. So yeah,
And so I want to go back and touch on one thing that you said, and then we'll call it a day here. But you talked about how like you had somebody throughout all the process of learning in undergrad and for the MCAT. One of the things is a lot of the material is out there. I mean, you could essentially take the all of the blueprint, the U World, all of Kaplan, all that stuff, and do things on your own. But we're social creatures, and so what that means is we learn socially. We have to have people to bounce ideas off of, to ask questions about certain content, and so nothing will replace a community. I thought about this when I was, creating, lectures for organic chemistry. And I was like, the lectures are there and people can watch them and reproduce and practice and whatever on their own. But really, the learning takes place with people alongside of you, having people to ask questions to, real people who are struggling with a lot of the same ideas and able to help each other answer the questions. A conversation that I had with my organic chemistry professor, and I talk about this as well, is that we have a lot of content available now for almost every subject, right? But that doesn't mean everybody does as well as, each other, right? There are other people who do better than others, right? So just because you have the content there, it can actually get you a little bit more complacent because you think you know it by watching it or seeing it and not
Right.
actually doing the problems. So you need the combination of everything. You need great content, great resources, but you need people to work on them with. You need people to ask questions from, professors, TAs, tutors. It's a whole community of things. The people who recognize that because they've done it, and that's why a lot of people in medicine are, really good about getting, their family members who are also interested in medicine the help they need. They have less like baggage about it or stigma on it because they realize, like, yeah, for you to successfully learn, you have to have groups, you have to have TAs, you have to have professors, you have to have tutors. So that's super important in any process. And I think you stumbled upon that organically just because you're a sociable person,
Yeah.
and you have really great connections. But it's super important to the learning process. Any last piece of advice that you would give an undergrad who's trying to pursue med school or dental school, or law school, or not law school, excuse me, pharmacy school? What would you say? Any ideas?
Yeah, definitely. Again, I guess just bouncing off that, like, me too. I would have been screwed in Orgo if I did not reach out for help. So I think seeking help is important. You can't be afraid to ask questions, especially going down this career path. You got to be willing to learn. Otherwise, things might not end up turning out the way you want them to because you're too afraid to ask those questions. So I think finding help when you need to, establishing a good circle around you, surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals, motivating individuals is very important as soon as possible throughout your undergrad journey. And aside from that stuff, like, of course, be as successful as you can outside of the classroom, but make sure you're enjoying yourself outside of it as well, like hanging out with your buddies, attending these social events, because you don't want to essentially burn yourself out by just staying in the library for 12 hours every day. So
Mhm.
find a good balance, manage your time wisely, ask questions. Don't be afraid to set up a tutor if you need to, because it'll be very beneficial, and just things like that. I think those are very important in terms of achieving success throughout undergrad.
Thank you so much, Usman. I really appreciate you, and it's great to hear your journey and your story. And I think a lot of people will gain a lot of value from this, from your experiences and your insight. So thanks again, and go Bucks.
Thank you so much. Go Blue.